The 1990 Tim Burton adaptation of Edward Scissorhands left a lot to be desired for a sequel, but even though we may never see that sequel on screen, we can see one unfold in the pages of a comic book. The 2014 comic book, based on the titular Edward Scissorhands, picks up the story a few years after the ending of the movie, which ended with Winona Ryder's Kim growing up to become an old woman who tells Edward's story to her granddaughter. In the comic book, there are new characters as well as a few old ones, and for the lesser known, a new addition to Edward's family. But before I begin, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvellous long reads. And now, let's begin. New discoveries. Years have gone by since Edward's painful return to isolation in his castle on the hilltop. Kim, Edward's beloved, became a mother and a grandmother, telling her granddaughter, Megs, about her encounter with Edward when she was a teenager. Kim's daughter, meanwhile, believed it to be nothing more than a fairy tale about a man in the castle who was a monster as well as a killer. Even the town where Edward was initially loved by all and then feared, he became just a rumour, a myth, with the story about that haunting Christmas night being forgotten underneath new stories and small-town gossip. Megs lost her grandmother, Kim, when she was just 12, and it hasn't snowed in their town ever since. In the present day, we catch up with Edward, the man with scissors for his hand inside his castle, creating a new ice sculpture of Kim. Despite not aging a day since his last appearance, his leather suit has become old and torn apart, while his scissor hands have become rustier. Admiring his latest creation, Edward hears the sound of something being thrown inside the gate of the castle. Curious about what may have arrived, Edward arrived to find a newspaper, smiling and thanking the young paperboy who had already left on his bike. As he enters the castle and walks up the Gothic stairs, he places the recently arrived newspaper in front of the fireplace, with the floor being filled with stacks of newspapers, while the wall is filled with various newspaper clippings. Looking at the wall, Edward points his scissor at the clipping which has the news of Kim's death, along with a picture of her. Missing Kim, Edward tries to distract himself by opening an old diary of his father, the inventor. He goes through the pages to notice a page with a picture of him. He turns the page over to notice another robot boy the inventor had tried to create, calling him Miscellany, but with a small note mentioning that something is missing in him. Curious to find this creation, Edward walks into a dark, locked room filled with various robots that the inventor had tried to create before Edward. Edward notices Miscellany to be hanging from wires. He has the appearance of a young boy with short hair and pitch black eyes with no mouth, giving it an uncanny appearance. Edward tries to lift his head with a scissor, but finds him to be unresponsive. As Edward continues to inspect him, he notices a circular locker with a keyhole in Miscellany's chest, which he opens using his scissors. This small move seems to have triggered something in Miscellany, as he lifts his head up to look at Edward, and then stands on his own 2 feet. As he looks at Edward once again, Edward greets his new friend with a hello. Meanwhile, in the town, at Megs's house, a sleepy Megs has her breakfast while her mother, Millie, tells her to wake up and reminds her to pack all her textbooks as well as lunch for school. Lost in thought, Megs asks her if they can go see Kim after school, but Millie hesitates. Megs reminds Millie that it is Kim's death anniversary, and after not getting a proper answer, Megs announces that she will visit Kim's by herself. Millie disapproves of the idea, promising that they will visit Kim's grave soon, but Megs reminds her that she gave the same excuse last year. As they get ready to leave for school, Megs notices the key for the family storage unit, which gives her an idea. As Millie drops her off at school, she tells Megs that Kim loved Megs, but she was not right, and despite all the fun tales that Kim told her, Megs had a hard time coping with them as a child. Megs tells Millie that Kim was not a liar, but instead she just didn't believe Kim when it came to Edward. Millie gets angry hearing this, and tells Megs that Edward was a murderer, but Megs reminds that Edward was not a killer, which Kim told everyone again and again, but everyone refused to believe her. Millie then points out in anger that nobody believed her because she was crazy, annoying Megs as she makes the excuse of getting late for school and leaves. Millie calls out to her, but with Megs leaving, she has a moment of grief for the strained relationship she has with her daughter, and then drives off. After school, Megs enters the storage area wondering how petty crimes and thievery are how criminals get made, as she takes out the key for a storage unit that she had stolen from her house. Entering the unit, Megs finds the place to be filled with various old things and a lot of dust. Noticing a box marked as Mum, she realises that it must belong to Kim. Megs opens the box to find Kim's old journal where she wrote about the time after to her boyfriend Jim's funeral. Kim tried to visit Edward's castle, but her mum, Peg, was watching her every move. Peg was worried how Kim visiting the castle would reflect on her, which Kim understood, but she couldn't help but focus on proving Edward's innocence. Regretting how she branded Edward to be a killer to protect him, she wanted to reveal the truth to someone in hopes that Edward would not be remembered just as a killer. Megs then finds a globe with a snow angel that has Kim's face carved, making Megs finally believe Kim's story about Edward to be true. Back in the castle, Miss Elaine, unable to walk yet, gets dragged by Edward, who keeps him in front of a pillar for back support. Wondering what he should call Miss Elaine, Edward walks away and returns with a green scarf that he puts on Miss Elaine, giving him the nickname Eli. Edward also hands Eli a pocket watch, but with Eli's claw-like hands, he ends up breaking it. As Edward leaves to find more things to give to Eli, he notices a rat caught in a nail and walks towards it. Edward returns to find the room to be filled with bloodstains and notices the rat has been killed. As Edward calls out to him, he notices Eli standing in front of the window, looking outside. Eli picks up his claws, which are revealed to be stained by blood. As Edward calls out to him once again, Eli looks at Edward with what is looking like a blank stare of a killer. Meeting at last. Intrigued by the outside world, Eli steps outside the castle as Edward looks at him from the window in horror as he notices the body of the dead rat. Coming down the stairs, Edward returns to the inventor's book and reads the information written on it about Eli. The inventor had noticed Eli's lack of response to any directions, him disassembling a grandfather clock in search of something while the empty hole in his chest can fit in a lot, but nothing seems to satisfy Eli. Noticing that the inventor's last note mentioned that Eli was decommissioned because of his hostility, Edward realized that he made a mistake by restarting Eli. Outside, Eli escapes the castle and walks out to find 3 young boys playing with each other. As he notices 2 of the boys high-five each other, Eli looks at his claws that make him feel different. As the 3 boys decide to leave, the dog of one of the boys, Simon, feels alerted about Eli's presence as he jumps in front of the dog. Eli uses his claws to grab Simon by the ear, but only manages to pull some of the dog's hair, making Simon run away in fear. As Simon returns to his owner, Eli stands up to keep the dog hair in his empty chest locker. Back in the castle, Edward follows Eli's bloody footprints, but soon gets attacked by a crow, making him fall on the ground and upset. Back at Megs's house, she confronts her mother with proof of Edward's existence, but Millie continues to call Kim delusional and tells Megs that she should have never looked through Kim's belongings. Realizing that Millie is just in denial, Megs questions why she bothered to keep Kim's belongings if she really believed that Kim was crazy, and asks why she hates Kim so much. Millie accepts that she never hated Kim, but also claims that Megs has no idea what she went through, although Megs asks if she wouldn't want to know what really happened to Edward. Millie then asks Megs how many photos or letters about her grandfather did she find in that box. When Megs says that she didn't go through everything in the box, Millie answers that there are none. Nothing in that box is related to Megs's grandfather. Millie leaves the room after telling Megs to not dwell in the past, as it is not good for anyone, but Megs gets a new idea as she takes out Kim's diary from her bag. Riding her cycle in the dark, Megs reaches the cemetery to visit Kim's grave, apologizing to her for visiting after a long time blaming it on Millie. As she once again goes through Kim's diary, Megs finds a key to the gate of Edward's castle in it. But as she looks behind her, she notices a broken piece of rusted scissor, which makes her realize that Edward is always present with Kim. Meanwhile, Eli continues his hijinks by following the dog, Simon, to the house of his owners, the Brosgol family. As the Brosgols sit down together for their dinner, Eli watches them from outside the window. As he notices the family chewing their food, Eli realizes that he lacks a mouth and starts scratching his face with his claws when the Simon the dog arrives there to try to bite him in the leg. Once Simon is called inside, he lets go of Eli's leg, and as soon as he goes inside, the family experiences a power cut. When the father goes out to check the power box, he notices the box has been destroyed with wires ripped out from it. Eli walks away from the house before he could be seen and puts the wires that he had ripped out from the power box into his chest locker and then continues walking, leaving behind destruction. Back at Edward's castle, Megs arrives outside the big gate and opens it using the key from Kim's diary. But as the gate opens, she notices Edward's scissor hands. Falling back on the ground in fear, Megs uses the light of her bike to properly see Edward's face, recognizing him, but as Edward sees Megs, all he can see is his beloved Kim. A child in need, Megs has finally come face to face with the myth and the legend, Edward Scissorhands, the man she has been hearing about in the tales of her grandmother, as well as Edward's love, Kim. Edward, though, initially confuses Megs to be Kim, but she clears out the misunderstanding and shows Kim's diary to Edward to prove that she is not lying. Meeting the man with scissors instead of hands, Megs cannot believe that he is real, and also has a lot of questions to ask him, but Edward tells her to come inside the castle, warning her that it is not safe outside. As they enter the castle, Megs is fascinated by the Gothic architecture, but her amusement turns into horror once Edward shows her the splattered blood right when Megs accidentally steps on the dead rat that Eli had killed. Megs immediately thinks that Edward killed the rat, backing away from him in fear. Edward tries to explain that it was Eli's actions and not his, but Megs decides to run for her life. But when Edward tries to stop her, his scissors accidentally tears the strap of Megs's backpack. Megs, cornered towards the wall, begs Edward to not kill her. He assures her that he will not cause her harm, and to prove that he opens a page from Kim's diary that has fallen on the ground and shows Megs a drawing of him cutting bushes with his hands. When Megs still asks Edward to explain the blood and the dead rat, Edward takes her to the inventor's book, which has Eli's details written on it. Reading what the inventor had written, Megs realizes that there is something very wrong with Eli, but while continuing to talk about how scary Eli looks, she unintentionally comments on Edward's uncanny looks, which makes him upset. But she's able to comfort Edward by accepting her mistake and communicating that her intention was not to hurt Edward and that she sometimes ends up saying stupid, awful things. Megs then questions Edward if there is a chance that Eli will go after people, but Edward sadly answers that he doesn't know, just as Megs tries to divert to a different topic, being curious about what actually happened on the Christmas night when Edward murdered Jim. Their conversation gets cut off by Millie shouting Megs' name while trying to look for her near the castle. Outside the castle, Millie walks around wondering how the shapes of the bushes are still intact as Megs, who used the castle's back door, comes up to her. Unable to control her anger, Millie scolds Megs, revealing that Megs' father and her had searched the town twice to find her. But Megs, realizing that she cannot share the true reason of her disappearance, lies about trying out her new brakes. Millie, getting even madder, reveals that Megs is going to be grounded. Millie's scolding continues even after they reach the house as she questions Megs for her torn backpack. And once Megs used the excuse of the bag getting caught in a fence, Millie questions what was Megs' intention for climbing fences on a school night. Tired of the scolding, Megs goes into her room and locks herself from the inside, while on the other side, Millie finally expresses that she was scared and concerned about her. Millie reveals that she knows what Megs was looking for in the castle, but she tells her that it is unsafe and she doesn't want Megs going back there. Getting no reply from Megs, Millie sighs that she doesn't know what she will do if she loses Megs too, but unbeknownst to her, Megs has already fallen asleep inside. Meanwhile, in the Brosgol residence, Stanley Brosgol finally managed to fix the light box after Eli unknowingly caused a power cut in their house. Putting out all the candles, Stanley's son, Phil, is asked to take out their dog, Simon, for a walk by Phil's mother. But as they go out, Simon notices Eli's presence near the bushes and starts barking at him. Phil assumes Eli to be one of his friends and walks towards him, but with Simon holding him back, he ties his dog to a nearby pole. Understanding Simon's fear, Phil tells his friend in the shadows to stop whatever prank he is trying to pull. Noticing his friend has gone missing, Phil enters the nearby forest to look for him when Eli pulls him from behind. Seeing Eli under light, Phil still believes Eli to be his friend wearing a mask. But from Simon's perspective, the sound of something cracking comes from the forest, leading him to roar loudly as Phil's fate remains a mystery. The next day, Megs finally wakes up for school, and as she sits down for breakfast, she gets to know from her dad that Millie has left for work early and her dad will be driving her to school. As she gets served pancakes for breakfast by her dad, Megs hears a news broadcast announcing the disappearance of 12 years old Philip, aka Phil Brosgol. The broadcaster also announces about a mysterious person who has been caught in security tapes while roaming around Phil's neighbourhood, although the two incidents are being treated as unrelated. Seeing the clip of the person caught in the security cameras, Megs realizes that it is none other than Eli. Realizing that she has to move fast to save Phil, Megs tells her dad she will ride her bike to school despite being late, as the news broadcaster continues to inform the viewers to remain aware of the unidentified person, and also to inform the local authorities if they get any information about the whereabouts of Philip, since the first few days of disappearance are crucial. While getting on her bike, Megs decides to make a detour first. Fears. Arriving at Edward's castle, Meg starts looking around for him, reaching the room where Eli had killed the rat earlier. She finds Edward trying his best to clean the bloodstains with a rag, but with his scissor hands, he was mostly just chopping the rags to pieces and scratching the wooden floor. Offering to help him clean, Megs informs Edward that Eli may have hurt a young boy already, or is probably planning to. Pointing out that they need to go after Eli, Megs asks for Edward's help, but he refuses to go outside the castle. When Megs reveals that Edward may be the only person who can find Eli, he reveals that the people outside are scared of him, so it is better for him to not leave. Understanding Edward's situation, Megs decides to pay a visit to the police alone, requesting Edward to let her borrow something. Once Megs arrives at the precinct, she is forced to deal with a grumpy police officer who couldn't care less about her help. Despite Megs' insistence that she has information that can help in finding Phil, the officer points out that the whole police force is out looking for the young boy and he is just an officer watching after the place. Pointing out that the police might be looking at the wrong location, Megs presents the officer with a page containing Eli's drawing from the inventor's book. Once Megs reveals that the creature that has taken Phil looks like a kid, but is actually really dangerous, the officer thinks that she is joking. Megs asks the officer if they have any surveillance cameras and requests to see the footage, but the officer goes on to call her crazy for expecting that. Once the officer gets a call, he quickly leaves for his house, leaving the precinct unattended. Taking advantage of the situation, Meg sneaks inside the surveillance room to check the footage and finds the footage of Eli attacking Phil. Running outside to call the officer, Megs remembers that she is the only one there. Turning back, she finds a board asking for criminals to wait if they have committed a crime, because the whole force is on a manhunt, an ironic situation. Megs goes on to pay a visit to the TV station in hopes of broadcasting her information to the town, but finds the place to be empty as well. As she rides around to look for people, Megs finds the whole town empty as she moves towards her school. Upon reaching, she finds the lights out inside the school and the parking area empty enough for her to park her bike near the school entrance. Soon, Megs notices her teacher, Ms. Summers, who is locking up the school as Megs runs towards her to talk about Phil's disappearance. Ms. Summers questions why Megs was there, wondering if Millie knew that she came to school, insisting that she should go back home along with offering her a ride, but Megs questions her confusingly if school has gotten cancelled. Ms. Summers tells Megs that the police have found the monster who has kidnapped Phil, assuring Megs that she understands how hard it must be for her. Further confused and frustrated by Ms. Summers, Megs tells her to be direct about what she is trying to say, and if the police found Phil. Ms. Summers finally reveals that Millie is at the castle because the police found that Edwards is alive and believes that he kidnapped Phil. Meanwhile, inside a cave-like space, Eli takes out different things that he has collected in his chest locker, showing them off to Phil, who is tied up. Eli shows him a spring toy that has a glowing light with music playing from it, but all Phil can be worried about is who Eli is. As Eli continues to break different things with his claws that he takes out from his chest locker, Phil keeps on asking who he is and where they are. Once Phil asks Eli if he can go back home, Eli grabs his face with his claws, which scares him enough to shut him up for a while. As Eli continues to try to interact with Phil using his collected objects, Phil tells Eli that he cannot understand him as tears fall down his cheeks. Eli grabs the glowing spring toy once more as he winds the key behind it to make the toy smile. Eli then tries to fit the key of the toy into the lock of his chest locker, after which he uses his claws to draw a smile on his face. This makes Phil understand that Eli is probably looking for a key that can help him work normally. When Eli points his claw at Phil, Phil reveals that he doesn't know how he himself works, pointing out that it may be because of guts, blood, and a heart. Hearing that Eli turns a piece of wire into the shape of a heart, but Phil still insists that he doesn't know how to help Eli. But right when Phil again insists on letting him go, Eli attacks him again, in the chest with his claws, seemingly trying to rip open his heart. Outside of Edward's castle, the whole town has gathered together to protest against him, making Megs worried once she arrives there. Without thinking much, Megs runs into the crowd trying to convince them about misunderstanding Edward, but she gets questioned by the officer she met earlier in the precinct if she already knew about Edward's involvement in Phil's disappearance. Meanwhile, reporters gather around her, asking about Megs's feelings about the man who killed her grandmother's high school boyfriend still being free. But just as Megs is getting surrounded, Millie calls out to her while holding a sign with "Save Our Children" written on it and tells Megs that she shouldn't be there. But seeing that her own mother is no better than the rest of the town, Megs throws the same words back at her. Lack of a heart. Outside Edward's castle, Millie shouts at Megs to open the gate to the castle, pointing out that she knows how to go inside, so she should let the crowd go inside as it is the right thing to do. But rather than getting intimidated, Megs calls out her mother and the rest of the town for going after the wrong person. Although before she could finish talking, the townspeople arrived with a truck to break the gate open, with the crowd walking towards the castle after breaking the gate and refusing to listen to Megs. She decides to try her own method to save Edward from them. The crowd initially bangs on the castle door, calling out Edward to return Phil and also calling him a murderer. When the door remains unopened, the officer uses a bazooka to break open the door, which Megs uses as a way to reach Edward first. Meeting up with him, Megs explains the situation of the townspeople, wrongly blaming him for Phil's disappearance. Understanding Edward's fears, Megs informs him that she has found Phil's location from the security footage. Despite the crowd hunting down Edward, Megs asks for his help to save Phil before something bad happens to him. Meanwhile, the crowd outside notices Meg's shadow along with Edward's from the window and decide to barge inside the castle together. Convincing Edward to run away, Megs tells Edward to find a secret passageway out of the castle. As the crowd gathers in the entrance hall, but seeing no signs of Edward, Phil's father, Stanley decides to break apart and look for his son. Millie is shocked to see the newspaper cut out of Kim's death posted on Edward's fireplace and suggests Stanley to call the police before taking any action themselves. But when Stanley says that his kid is his only priority, Millie agrees in a grim manner. Under the castle, Megs and Edward take a dark passageway that allows them to escape from the forest. As they get out of the passageway, Edward notices Megs's bleeding hand and, trying to find a way to help her, rips out a leather strap from his own clothes to offer to Megs. Thanking Edward for his kindness, Megs decides that they need to keep moving as they may run out of time to save Phil. Arriving at the forest near Poplar Street where Phil was attacked by Eli, the duo finds a large tree with a large hole on the ground. Going inside the hole, Megs starts calling out to Phil while Edward faintly calls out to Eli. As they go in further, Megs finds Phil tied up and beaten up with a bloody heart-shaped wound on his chest. Looking at Edward, Phil shouts at Megs to keep him away, thinking of him to be just as evil as Eli because of their similar appearance. Megs assures Phil that Edward is a good person and decides to first free Phil from captivity. Unable to free Phil, Megs asks Edward for some help, and with his Scissorhands, he frees Phil in one try. Breaking the spring toy that Eli used to scare him earlier, Phil requests Megs to leave before Eli, aka the monster, returns. But despite Megs' insistence, Phil refuses to be near Edward because of his scary appearance. This conversation gets cut short once Eli returns, trying to attack the trio by throwing a clock at them, but thankfully it misses them. With a scary smile carved into his face, Eli goes on to attack Edward, who tells Megs to run. Helping Phil get out of the hole, Megs goes back to Edward while calling out to him. Inside, Eli attacks Edward in his chest to find that he has a heart that the inventor gave him, but not to Eli, making it obvious what makes Eli more evil than Edward. As Edward keeps staring, Eli opens his chest locker and takes out a chunk of his own wiring and parts, slowly killing himself. Edward shouts at Eli to stop it, but Eli rips open the part of his face where his mouth should be, creating an expression of sadness as he falls on the ground, marking Eli's end. Sitting in front of Eli's lifeless remains, Edward calls out to Megs. She gets confused regarding why Eli would tear himself apart while showing Edward the small piece of scissors she had earlier found in front of her grandmother's grave. While Megs comforts Edward, he reveals that Eli got upset once he touched the inside inside of Edward's chest. Megs tells Edward that Eli had something really wrong with him, which made him sick. Fixing Edward's clothes using a safety pin, Megs realizes that there is something inside of Edward which Eli didn't, most probably a heart. Edward agrees to Megs' statement as Megs tells him that she is glad Edward is not like Eli. The moment breaks once Millie arrives and calls out to Megs from outside the hole, asking if Edward tried to hurt her, but Megs assures Millie that she's okay and she gets out of the hole, giving her mother a tight hug. Immediately noticing Megs' injury, Millie questions Megs if Edward was the one responsible, if he tried to hurt Phil too, but Megs again tells her mother that Edward didn't hurt her, or Phil instead he saved the two of them, assuring her that Edward is just as good as what Kim used to tell them, making Millie confused. Phil reunites with his family while Edward peeps out of the hole, making Millie wonder if that is the Edward she has heard so much about from her mother. Seeing Eli's lifeless remains, Millie asks Edward if Eli will come back, but Edward tells her that he has gone to sleep. Phil's father, Stanley, thanks both Megs and Edward for rescuing Phil, along with apologising to Edward for destroying his house. Phil says goodbye to both of his saviours, as Millie tells Megs that she needs to get checked at the hospital, while Millie will call the police to tell them about what actually went down, assuring Edward that they can fix Edward's reputation in the town. The next day, Millie helps Edward bury Eli where he took his life, placing a rose bush above it, which Edward cuts with his hand to look like Eli, keeping a rose where his heart was supposed to be. Praising Edward's creation, both Millie and Megs invite Edward into their house. A new beginning. While Edward stayed with Megs' family, the whole town decided to help Edward fix his castle. Edward also forms a closer bond with Stanley, who helps with wiring his house with electricity, and even praises Edward's Scissorhands when Stanley is unable to open a tool package. Megs arrives at the castle, marvelling at the new condition of the place. Millie also arrives there to inform that by evening, the fence around the castle will be back up. This makes Megs realise that with the castle fixed, Edward will not be staying in her house anymore. She gives Edward a tight hug and tells him that she will miss him wrecking the couch like a cat. When Edward questions that, with tears coming out of her eyes, Megs fixes her statement from a cat to a big old spooky tiger. Meanwhile, the police officer who had refused to listen to Megs during Phil's disappearance is also present in the castle, setting up a television for Edward with a custom remote that has metallic buttons so that Edward doesn't break it while using. The officer also asks Edward if they are on good terms now, especially because the officer had taken out an arrest warrant against Edward. Edward questions what a warrant even is, but the officer believes that Edward is pretending to forget about the warrant to show that he has no grudge against him. Thanking all the townspeople who helped him, Edward notices a commercial on the TV where a man is thanking Dr. Wells from the Get Wells reality show to help fix his webbed feet, allowing him to enjoy the beach with his kids again by wearing sandals. Edward asks Megs about Dr. Wells, to which she reveals that Dr. Wells is a reality show host where she gives miracle makeovers to her guests, starting from mole removals to major plastic surgeries. Megs also shares her own opinion of Dr. Wells, mentioning that when the guests have genuine problems they face in their day-to-day life, it makes sense to help them out, but other times she feels Dr. Wells is taking advantage of her guest to become famous. Dr. Wells even started her own line of makeup, as well as designer glasses through her show, which gives Megs a weird feeling. Megs also shared that many of her guests have nothing wrong with them in the first place, but Dr. Wells still gets praised by her audience and viewers for making her guests look what they believe to be normal. Edward still points out that her guests look happy after the makeover, but before Megs could say anything else to that, she gets called by Millie to return to their house. The next day, on their way to school, Millie notices that Megs is upset and asks her about it. Megs reveals that she will miss Edward, especially now that the whole town is being nice to him, even though they were just ready to burn his house down a few days ago. Millie again asks her what is wrong, when Megs confides that she and Edward were watching a show together, and she feels that she may have said something wrong to Edward. Millie asks what show they were watching, but Megs ends the conversation as she is getting late for school. But before leaving, Millie calls out to Megs to say I love you to her, showing that their relationship is slowly recovering after Edward's arrival. Millie notices that Megs has left her notebook, but upon closer inspection realises that it's actually her mother, Kim's diary. Back in Edward's castle, he has gotten hooked on television. As he surfs through channels, he comes across an episode of Get Wells where she's helping a young girl named Margaret. Margaret was amputated dislocated below her ankle years ago, and Dr. Wells is helping her with a brand new foot. As the show goes to commercial, Edward notices an advertisement of Dr. Wells tells her viewers to send her their stories, and if they get selected, then they will be brought on the show where she will give them a makeover free of cost. This makes Edward wonder if Dr. Wells will be able to help him get human hands. As school gets over, Meg sits on the sidewalk as she waits for her mother. Soon she meets up with Phil, who offers her a ride home as his friend Jordan's older brother has been driving them home every day. Wondering if her mum is visiting Edward in the castle, Megs agrees to ride with Phil there. As she gets into the car, Megs is introduced to Aiden, Jordan's doting older brother, who Megs has seen in school working in the video section of the yearbook. As they prepare for the ride, Aiden fixes the rear view mirror to make Megs visible. Back in Meg's house, Millie sits with Kim's diary as she remembers her childhood. Kim and her husband Gerald had a strained relationship, especially because he knew of her stories about Edward and felt that she actually loved him more than her own husband. Because of this, when Kim was happy because of the snow, Gerald got mad at her. During one of these arguments, Millie came up to her mum as the two of them enjoyed the view of the snowfall together, but Gerald was pissed to the point of breaking a plate. Millie asked Kim if Gerald was mad, but Kim instead assured her that he was okay and told her to enjoy the view of snow instead. Remembering this, Millie started crying, which her husband, Joel, witnessed after coming back home early. Joel comforts her as he asks if Millie has opened the diary yet, but Millie says that she has just been staring at the diary, not understanding if she wants to know what is written there. When Joel asks Millie about Megs, she tells him that her school gets over in an hour, but Joel reminds her that she is actually late to pick up Megs, leading her to leave in a hurry. Outside the school, Millie runs into Ms. Summers, who tells her that Megs took a ride to the castle with Aiden and Jordan, Gibson and Phil. As they reach the castle, there's numerous cars parked outside of other town visitors. Megs and Aiden start getting to know each other as they walk towards the castle from the main gate. Aiden reveals that he has been keeping a check on Jordan and Phil ever since the kidnapping incident, but he also got to ride his mum's car because of it. Inside the castle, Phil met his father, Stanley, who upon Megs' questioning reveals that Millie has not visited the castle after dropping off Megs in school. Aiden offers to drop Megs to her place as she asks for a few minutes to check on Edward, but much to her surprise, she sees that Edward's eyes have turned red after watching the television up close. Megs reminds Edward that he has a couch which he can use while watching TV, but Edward reveals that he has been trying to send Dr. Wells his story. Megs tries to persuade Edward against it by saying that the show will rot his brain, but Aiden instead arrives to say that despite the show's cheesy format, Dr. Wells is quite good at her work. Megs tells Edward that he doesn't need to be fixed, but Aiden persuades her to give it a shot, as it should be Edward's decision to go for the show or not. Pointing out that only a small number of submissions gets accepted into the show, Aiden motivates Edward by saying that Dr. Wells must not have seen anyone like Edward, which Megs agrees to. As Millie arrives at the castle, she sees that a full-fledged professional shoot has started there to help Edward submit his story to Dr. Wells. Second chance. Inside the office of Dr. Wells, she asks her assistant Lilith about the new submissions. Lilith plays one submission in particular, saying that Dr. Wells will definitely like it, which is revealed to be none other than Edward's submission. Edward's friends played characters from his past to narrate Edward's backstory of how he was created by the inventor, who is portrayed by Phil, while his dog, Simon, played Edward, further narrating about how the inventor died before giving Edward his hands, leaving him incomplete. But Edward is a legend in the town who wants a chance to lead a normal life. He is further called a gentle soul who unfortunately has scissors for hands. All of Edward's friends then come together to request Dr. Wells to help him get a second chance in life, with Edward ending the video by creating paper dolls resembling Dr. Wells. Impressed by the video, Dr. Wells immediately calls Lilith to ask if Edward is even real or not. Natalie says that his hands seem to be some kind of an attachment, but he is definitely a local legend, especially after he saved the life of a young boy. Thinking that Edward being a guest on her show will do wonders for the ratings, Dr. Wells tells her assistant to get Edward on the show in whatever way possible. Back in the castle, Edward and Megs prepare to watch a movie when Megs realizes realizes that Edward has been staring out of the window. When she asks Edward about it, he reveals that he is waiting for the mail to find out Dr. Wells's reply. Meggs tries to comfort him by telling him again that Dr. Wells gets a lot of submissions, so chances are usually slim. But before she could complete, Edward notices Aidan and Phil arriving. Aidan reveals the good news to Edward that Dr. Wells has selected him and they have gotten the confirmation through email. Excited that Edward will probably get his wish fulfilled along with getting famous, the group get into Aidan's car to go to his place. On the way, the group decides on how they will get to Dr. Wells' set, with Edward suggesting that Millie can drive them because the set is 4 hours away from the town. Aidan also points out that Dr. Wells left her personal number in the email for them to contact her. As they enter Aidan's house, Phil asks Edward if he has been on TV before. Edward says that he has, but right when he asks if it was fun, Edward remembers how he embarrassed himself back then. Phil still cheers him up by saying that it will be better this time. Entering the house, the group is greeted by Aidan's mum, who offers them muffins. Moving to Aidan's room, they finally read Dr. Wells's email, where she assures Edward she can fix him. Impressed by her reply, Aidan decides to give Wells a call by pretending to be Edward's secretary, initially confusing Dr. Wells. Although once she realizes that it's Edward Scissorhands calling for her, she asks to talk to him directly and shows her sympathy by appealing to his grief about not being able to touch anyone else. Gaining his affection, Dr. Wells asks Edward to visit the studio with his friends, to which Edward agrees. Once the call is over and they receive the information about the studio's location, Phil gets convinced that Dr. Wells must really like Edward. Aidan asks Meggs if Millie can drive them there, and fortunately for Edward, Millie ends up agreeing to it right away because she recognises Dr. Wells. Meggs, being hesitant, gives excuses of the place being far and then having to miss her school, along with Millie hating traffic and crowds to cancel the plan. Failing to convince Millie, Meggs finally reveals that she is worried what if Edward is seen as some kind of a freak, but Millie assures her that they will leave immediately if that happens. Edward too assures Meggs that he will be able to handle being on TV. With Meggs properly convinced, the weekend finally arrives when Edward will be visiting the set of Get Wells along with Millie, Aidan and Phil. As they start their journey, it is soon revealed that they have an extra person in the car, which is Simon, Phil's dog, who he carried inside his luggage. Even though Meggs gets annoyed by it, Edward expresses that he really missed Simon. Something suspicious. Arriving at a gas station, the group gets some rest in the car while Meggs and Aidan buy snacks from the store for their road trip. Inside the store, Aidan buys a bunch of snacks, calling it to be an integral part of the road trip. Upon exiting the store, Meggs points out that Aidan may have taken off 5 years of the life of the female cashier. When Millie asks if the cashier tried to hassle them, Aidan points out that she actually gave him a dirty look. Hearing this, Edward offers to talk to her on his behalf, but Millie instead decides to hit the road to avoid the kids getting into some sort of trouble. As they reach the studio, Dr. Wells personally comes to greet all of them and even introduces herself on a first-name basis to Edward, asking him to call her April. She also flatters Aidan and Phil by calling them movie stars for shooting the video that got Edward the opportunity to get on TV. Taking the group to her set, everyone marvels at it, with Meggs wondering if the set is expensive or not. April then notes that the set is indeed more expensive than anything that Meggs can imagine, offending her. April asks Edward if he would like to come for a preliminary interview the next day for the audience to get to know him. April asks Edward if he has been on TV before, to which Meggs replies that it didn't go so well the last time around. In order to convince Edward, April promises that the interview will be as easy and stress-free as possible for the experience to be a positive one for Edward. Edward agrees to it, while April, requesting the group to stay for one more day, offers them rooms in the Plaza de Val for the night. As they check into the hotel, Edward wears a long trench coat to hide his scissor hands, as well as to not draw unwanted attention. Phil and Aidan take a room to themselves while Millie and Meggs take another, leaving Edward all by himself in his room. As the four of them settle into their rooms, Edward has a tough time settling in because of his hands, as the scissor punctures and breaks most of the things in the room. As Meggs grows bored in the room, she asks Millie if she can go out to grab a drink from the vending machine. On her way there, she comes across Phil, who is going to the vending machine to buy gummy bears. As they purchase their snacks, Megs asks Phil if he feels scared ever since the incident with Eli, which Phil agrees to, as he sometimes wonders what would have happened that night if Edward and Megs hadn't arrived on time to help him. Megs agrees that it's a logical fear to have, but she's glad that they were able to arrive to save Phil on time. Phil then reveals that his mother initially didn't want him to come for the trip, but then she believed that in case of anything bad, Phil has Edward, Megs and Aidan to protect him. Megs calls Phil lucky for having such a good mum, but Phil points out that her mum is good too. Phil reveals that when Millie was not able to find Megs during the Eli incident, she confided with his father, Stanley, about how scared she was about Megs. Megs, even though a bit unconvinced, believes it is not always easy to see the true emotions of a parent. Meanwhile, back in Megs' room, Millie reads Kim's diary as she remembers the time when she saw her parents dancing in the snow, but soon that special moment turned into a fight, leading Millie to hate on Edward. Edward, on the other hand, continues to have a hard time with the room and even fails to watch TV as he ends up breaking the remote, leaving him no other option but to lie in his bed. The next day, Edward is prepped with makeup for the interview as he asks the makeup artist if he knows Peggy, Kim's mother, not realising that a long time has passed since Peggy did makeup. Before the interview, Megs tells Edward to be careful and to not participate in anything against his own will, while Aidan tries to stop Megs from overwhelming Edward. As the interview starts, Edward initially feels a bit nervous, but April tells him to not worry about the audience and rather get comfortable. April starts the interview asking Edward about why he is on the show. Edward talks about his house, his hobbies of making sculptures well as cutting hair. When April asks if there is some creative endeavour that he wants to pursue in the future, Edward confides that he wanted to paint but couldn't because of his hands. Edward ends the interview recalling that someone once told him that he cannot touch anyone without hurting them, so he hopes that one day he can touch another person without hurting them. This causes Megs to remember how Edward unknowingly had hurt her, even though he didn't want to. April calls the interview to be a hit and wants to shoot the before segment of Edward's makeover the next weekend, making Megs wonder the point of the interview that just happened. But April calls that and getting to know you interview that helps in creating excitement among the audience. As Megs gets confused, April opens the back door of their set to reveal audience members who are already fans of Edward. April uses this moment to give Megs a taste of fame when she reveals to the audience that Megs helped Edward rescue a young boy. Overwhelmed with the praises Megs got from the fans, April uses the opportunity to announce that Edward and his friends will be appearing next week on the show, much to Megs' shock and without a formal approval from Edward. The group clicks a picture with April as they finally get in the car and get on the road. As everyone cannot stop talking positively about the experience, including Edward, along with praising April for how she treated them, the only thing that was on Megs' head was how hard April grabbed her shoulder while getting the picture clicked. Ulterior motives. The weekend for Edward's next interview arrives as Lilith, April's assistant, informs her that Edward has arrived on the set. April asks if Edward has arrived alone, to which Lilith points out that Megs and Millie are also accompanying him, but April sees it as a problem. Lilith assures her that she will keep the mother-daughter backstage, but April says that they may need to take care of her. It is now that April's secret is revealed when Lilith points out that just because their rating has gone down doesn't mean that they have to settle for extreme measures. April shouts at Lilith to not reveal anything about ratings outside her green room. Outside, everyone needs to believe that April is still very successful. April threatens Lilith that if they lose the show, then Lilith will be on the bus back to Iowa in the next week itself, forcing Lilith to agree to her ways. In the backstage, Megs asks Edward once again if he is sure about the makeover, to which he agrees. April arrives to meet with them backstage, trying her best to keep Megs away from Edward so that he doesn't get influenced. April continues her pretends, asking about Aidan, Philip and Simon. She also reveals that Edward's first interview has done wonders for the show, as the current one had people waiting in line for 6 hours to get a ticket in the live audience. As both Edward and Megs get nervous hearing this, April takes Edward for the next interview. Introducing Edward once again to the crowd, April asks him if he is feeling nervous, which he agrees to, and talks about the procedure to give him new hands to be an intense one. In the backstage, Lilith takes Megs and Millie upstairs, giving the excuse that they will get a better view of the show. But Meg stops once she hears the Crow cheering for April to fix Edward again and again. Megs runs into the set to tell April that she is not going to be fixing Edward because there is nothing wrong with him. But April manipulates this moment to introduce Megs as Edward's girlfriend. Holding Megan hostage, April announces how the two of them rescued Philip, a kidnapped boy. April asks Megs if she is concerned about what may happen to Edward on his road to recovery, to which she agrees. But April soon manipulates this situation to make the audience believe that Megs and Edward are a couple, asking the audience if they want the two of them to look their very best. April then offers to give Megs a complimentary, expert, one-of-a-kind Dr. Well-approved makeover, making the audience cheer loudly. Megs protests by saying that there is nothing wrong with her, but April points out one by one that she can whiten her teeth, use some Rogue, some lip colour, and even suggesting that Edward can give her a haircut. Despite her not wanting the makeover, Megs ends up not expressing her feelings as she gets overwhelmed by the crowd. Later, Megs and Aidan talk on the phone about what she just went through, with Megs accepting that the cheering and clapping of the crowd made her freeze on the stage. Aidan asks Megs if she will go through with the makeover, but Megs feels that she will have to, even though her mum was worried for her initially, especially since April has her ways of convincing people. Just when Aidan tried to comfort her, the conversation gets cut short by Millie knocking on the door, asking for a key. Just when she opens the door, Megs is shocked to find that it is not only her mother waiting, but also April. April asks Megs if she is ready for the makeover with Millie, revealing that April has explained to her about every part of the plan. Megs asks if Edward is okay with it, while April lies and says that he is. Megs tries to call April out on her blatant lying, but gains no support when she turns to her mother as she leaves the final decision on Megs, assuring her that she will be right outside the closed set, meaning that Megs will be all by herself. Meanwhile, in Edward's room, Lilith pays him a visit and tells him that his friends are in big trouble. Meanwhile, April takes Megs to the closed set, throwing on a chair, while Millie, who is watching the makeover on a monitor, realizes that she cannot hear anything and asks a man for help. Edward and Lilith, meanwhile, walk towards the elevator, revealing that April has held Millie and Megs hostage and they need rescuing. Lilith further accepts that she shouldn't have listened to April, revealing that her show is nearing cancellation and April is only using Edward to boost her ratings. As the elevator door opens to the floor, April greets the two of them with her bodyguards. Lilith gets dragged by the bodyguards into the lift, while April reveals to Edward that she has taken Megs hostage, making him hear Megs asking for help on a walkie-talkie. Edward calls out April's actions to be wrong, but is forcefully made to fall unconscious. Once Edward opens his eyes, he notices that he has been tied up alongside Megs and Millie. Millie shouts at April to let them go, to which April reveals that everything would have gone down easily if Megs hadn't interfered earlier. April tells Megs that if April had just remained happy with the makeover, then she wouldn't have needed to pull this situation, but Megs just calls her sick. Edward requests April that he will do the show, but to let Meg and Millie go. But with what they've witnessed already, April cannot risk it any more to let them go. April tells Edward that she will help him, and the both of them will get exactly what they want, whether he likes it or not. A promise. We open with a flashback to when Millie was a child. Gerald woke her up from her sleep, greeting her as she asked her father where her mum was. Gerald lies that she went for a walk, but Millie asks him directly if Kim went to Edward's house. When Gerald thinks that Kim did go to meet Edward, Millie shouted to her father that she hated the house, hated when her parents fought, and she especially hated Kim. Coming back to the present, April has tied up Edward for the surgery and tells Megs that hating her will not affect her anymore, for she has worked in television long enough to have a thick skin that even Edward's scissors cannot break. April threatens Megs that after Edward it will be her turn, but Megs tells her that once awake, Edward will reveal April's true nature to everyone. But April retorts by saying that once Edward wakes up, he will be a real boy who has everything he ever wanted, along with a huge group of audience that will adore his every move. Megs tells April that he doesn't care about any of that, but April calls out how Megs, despite what she says, jumped at the chance of getting a makeover, which ended up getting her in this situation. April even calls out Millie's agreement to the makeover as her being responsible too, but Millie points out that she thought it was what Megs wanted. April calls out Millie too, as she too thought that a makeover is exactly what Megs will need to attract decent boys wearing something beside nail polish. Hearing Millie's almost unheard protest, Megs realises that April's take is true to some extent. April then says that she doesn't have any more time for them or their justice or their rights because all she cares about is making some quality television. As she leaves the two of them, April reveals that if Edward ever reveals her truth, then she will kill both Megs and Millie. We see another flashback of Edward enjoying the snow in his castle when Kim called out to him. Kim embraced Edward in a hug as the two of them told each other how much they've missed each other. Realizing that Kim was upset, Edward asked her about it. Initially hesitant, Kim revealed that she didn't think that she's good at being a wife. What scared her more was if she would fail at being a good mother, especially with the look of disappointment she had seen in Millie's face. She revealed that Gerald didn't like when she talked about Edward to him, saying she was still stuck in the past and she felt that she was. Kim stopped as she realized that Edward probably didn't want to hear about her troubles, but Edward told her otherwise. Edward then asked Kim if she loved Gerald, to which she answered more than anything. Edward told Kim that she should be happy, but Kim accepted that she couldn't help but wonder about what could have been. Edward agreed to Kim's sentiment but accepted his drawback of never being able to touch her, reminding her that her family could and that her little girl needed her. Kim reminded Edward one last time that she would always love him, and Edward expressed the same to her. Before Kim left, she asked Edward to look after Millie if anything happened to her and Gerald, which Edward happily agreed to. As memory comes to a close, Edward realizes that he'd just dreamt about Kim and finding out that Lilith has come to rescue her along with Aidan, Philip and Simon. When Edward asked about April, Lilith revealed that she had gone for a costume change before the surgery, while Aidan revealed that they just arrived at the studio, but when Simon kept scratching the backstage door, they found Lilith unconscious inside. The group then arrived in the studio where Megs and Millie are kept and helped freeing them as Lilith tells them to hurry up because April can see everything through the cameras. When April appears on the big screen agreeing to Lilith and threatens them, Edward breaks the cameras through which she is watching them. April soon arrives with her bodyguards, but despite Edward trying to scare them with his scissors, she knows that he will not hurt any of them. The tension finally gets cut once Lilith punches April, breaking her nose and ruining her face. The bodyguards also gets managed by Edward, but just as April is about to make an exit, Edward stops her. April threatens Edward by saying that he will never get his hands and become normal if she gets jailed, but Edward tells her that more than being normal, he cares about not letting April hurt his friends ever again. As April gets taken into police custody, she tells the group that they will never be able to prove that she is guilty and she will get out of jail posting bail before they even get back to their town. But her words end up being proven wrong when Phil comes out with a video recorder where her threats have been recorded, making sure that she never gets out of jail. April tries to save herself by saying that they have no right to record her, but Megs shut her up while Millie makes her stop by saying that she likes being on camera. As Edward thanks Phil for his help, he mentions that it probably makes them even in terms of saving each other's lives. Realizing what Edward has given up on to save their lives, Millie expresses her gratitude to him and says that she will never forget this. Edward tells her that he had to do it because he once made a promise to look out for her. Millie says that she will try that favour too. Megs apologises to Edward, saying that she should have listened to him, but Edward also points out how Megs was correct about April not being a good person. Megs still says, "What about his hands?" But Edward then points to her hands, which are holding Aidan's hand. Megs gets embarrassed, but Edward tells her, just like how he once told her grandmother Kim, that she should be happy. As we return to the flashback of the day Kim last visited Edward, we see Kim returning to her house, calling out her daughter. Kim apologised to Millie for unknowingly upsetting her and embraced her young daughter in her arms. Kim expressed to Millie how much she loves her and also embraced her husband Gerald, telling him that she loves him too, no matter what. Conclusion. For the fans of the 1990 Tim Burton adaptation of Edward Scissorhands, the fans were left with a lot of curious questions. The 2014 comic book adaptation of the character can be seen as a spiritual successor, narrating a new tale and a happy ending for the titular character. When the movie had ended, fans were left to wonder if Edward ever met Kim after that Christmas night. If Kim's granddaughter ever tried to look for Edward after hearing her story of the man that made snow fall all in their small town for the first time? Well, in this comic we see those questions being answered. Not only does Edward regain the love of the town where he once lived, but this time made a huge group of friends he didn't have the last time. Not only that, but fans got to see that Edward's love for Kim was so strong that he persuaded her to be happy with her husband and daughter, even though they still loved each other after years had passed. Edward also got the best ending possible, surrounded by a group of people who loved him just for who he is and understood that he doesn't need to fix anything about himself. And isn't that what he wanted, which is to touch people, if not with his hands, then with his kindness, perhaps?